Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Avigdor. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I'm the Chief Product Officer for Votiro. And as a side note, Votiro has just been acquired by Menlo Security. We'll talk about that later on. But we're gathered here today to talk about the 2025 Data Security Playbook. What we're really going to dive into is a whole new space within the data security and threat prevention space, which will allow you to stay ahead of emerging threats, looking at different aspects, different entry points and exit points for risks and data, and how to be well prepared, leveraging the best tools, which are also the most cost efficient ones, which will allow you to securely deliver on some of the most important projects, such as insider threat management, third-party risk, and threat prevention. And with that, let's get started. So we'll talk about the data security landscape, a few of the novel threats that we're seeing in the market. We'll be covering threats that we're seeing growing and emerging in 2025, how to defend against those, and we'll cover some takeaways both on the Votiro front and the Menlo security front. So let's kick this off. I'd like to highlight three different types of attacks that we've been seeing across the board in all three regions, in North America, in Europe, and in Asia Pacific. We've been seeing all of these three attack vectors or risk vectors growing in and becoming more and more dominant. And they're slightly different. Each one of them is slightly different, and there are different ways to protect against each one of these. But I think when we think about the problem from the angle of what is actually the source of the threat, that is where we can actually provide some reasonable answer to how we can protect against them. So the first one would be your traditional hacker, which is trying to infiltrate and hack into your environment. You know, Evolve Bank was a great example, attacked by Lockbit, ransomware attack using a malicious link that was within an email, a phishing email. The user clicks on the link. Eventually, it loads down a software, usually lately packaged within a password-protected encrypted file. The password would be shared over a different medium. The file comes in, it's downloaded, detonates on the endpoint, moves laterally within the organization, and that is what starts the ransomware-based attack. From that moment on, once the data is either encrypted and locked or stolen, from that point on, the only option that's available is either to pay the ransom, which is not honestly a great idea, or to try to reverse engineer the attack and to remediate the data. So that is one vector which we keep seeing growing more and more and more, especially in sophistication with the usage of AI. AI is now being used to create sophisticated malware, ransomware, and phishing-based attacks, and we'll talk in a moment about how that happens. But the second angle is something we've had for many, many years, and we had reasonable tools for a while to deal with them. And this one is insider risk or insider threat. So you have a malicious insider which has an intention of selling company secrets or selling private data on the free market, on the dark web, for financial benefits. So we have a couple of examples here just from lately to Toronto Dominion Bank, Navy Federal Credit Union. We've seen insiders intentionally selling private data online to scammers. And the reason we want to point this out is because the tactics and the mechanics of dealing with an insider risk probably are somewhat different than dealing with preventing malware and ransomware or a phishing-based attack. And the third angle, which is in my mind the one that's been growing the fastest from what we're seeing with Votiro and Menlo customers and what we're hearing from analysts, is really third-party risk. And the problem with third-party risk, which we've known this for decades, say you're a large enterprise and you have reasonable cyber defense and you have defense in depth and you have all the tools needed, or at least a reasonable amount of tools needed, you still have tens, if not hundreds of partners out there which are providing services and have some access to private and sensitive data. And as we know, these smaller partners will not have that same level of security and controls that you may have. And because of that, that introduces a backdoor, a risky entry and exit point for data, where we need to ensure that private data, sensitive data is not exposed where it shouldn't, and where risks cannot actually come in through that less secured entry point into my organization. So let's talk about how we deal with all three of these different problems and challenges. Before we talk about the tactics of what do we need to put in place, I'd like to talk about really what is different, or what we're seeing is becoming different in 2025 versus some of the legacy, more traditional attacks. So the first one is AI. Everyone is talking about this. We've been talking about this for a while. AI is not only used to create new software, sophisticated software, it is really and very successfully, highly successfully used to create highly likely phishing attacks. Phishing attacks that would be much more likely to create the reasonable trap that anyone would fall into. How? Because LLMs, AI, now can actually tap into your social network, into your social media, learn about your interests, create a phishing attack, which seems very reasonable to come from someone you know or from a service that you might be familiar with, which makes more and more people vulnerable to this type of social engineering, which would then lead to that innocent insider click on a malicious link, which then starts a malware-based attack, a ransomware attack, or any other form of account takeover, credential theft, or potential other types of attacks. So the sophistication of AI, now what it actually really means from a threat prevention perspective is really also that the user education tools and user education programs that we use are now a bit less successful in achieving that goal of ensuring that the user always does the right thing. So for that, really what we're trying to do is look at technologies that would be preventing the user from making the mistake, even if they unintentionally fell for the trap of clicking on a link or providing credentials where they shouldn't. So preventative technologies would be key to deal with this type of problem. But back to third-party risk, which we talked about a moment ago. Third-party exposure is becoming more and more important in two different angles. The first one is we're using more and more SaaS services, cloud services for our business applications. In many cases, those are not managed by central IT. They're managed by the business unit, so security controls are not on par. And what we're seeing, based on some of the analysis Gartner's been doing, is that roughly 29%, so 1 of 3 almost breaches, actually have a third-party vector involved, which means one of your partners, one of your suppliers, one of your software suppliers might be the entry point from which your data will be exfiltrated. Regulations keep getting more problematic. We're seeing updates in GDPR. We're seeing updates to PCI DSS. For example, the NCUA is now enforcing PCI DSS on credit unions. This is a massive effort for a small credit union with a limited IT team. More and more regulations are calling for more cybersecurity, more malware prevention on one hand, and better controls on private and sensitive data to ensure that that data is not exfiltrated, misused, or overshared within the organization. And last but not least, everyone uses this statistic, everyone loves it, simply because it is true and it holds true. for a very long time now, over a decade. Every year we look at the amount of new data created in the cloud, and what we find is 90% of that data that exists in the universe, or at least on planet Earth, 90% of that data has been generated in the last 2 years, which once again talks to the enormous amount of data out there, which makes it more and more difficult to control it. One of the things I see in many cases when I talk to Votiro and Menlo customers and prospects is that, hey, we've just moved from on-prem to cloud, maybe with Google, maybe with Microsoft, and now our data is all out there in Google Cloud, in Azure, in OneDrive, in SharePoint, in Amazon. How do we ensure that that data is compliant and safe? So let's talk about the how. How do you protect your data? At the end of the day, both cyber defense, data protection, all of those mechanics are in place in order to protect that data from being exfiltrated or from your credentials being misused. So how do we protect against these types of attacks? And again, we're going to circle back into these 3 different attack vectors: malicious hacker, insider threat, third-party risk. Let's talk about the 3 technologies that are out there currently to help defend against some of these types of attacks. So we have DLP, data loss prevention, data security posture management, and a new coined term, which is data detection and response, and we'll cover the differences between them. When talking about sophisticated threat actors trying to infiltrate by deploying malware and ransomware, or a zero-day attack, which does not carry a known signature, is not known to the antivirus market, is not known to the sandbox community, something novel that is placed in the market, deployed in one region, and then finds its ways into other regions as well. How do all of these technologies stand up against that type of threat? So when we talk about DLP, data loss prevention, it's a tool that's been around for a while. Intention of DLP is basically to prevent users from sharing data where they shouldn't be sharing data. So really the main intention is detecting specific types of private data and then preventing those when they're in motion from moving through email, through downloads, through uploads into portals, holding those back from being overshared. The challenge there is that DLP tools are very strict in the ways that they will allow you to set up rules and policies. Regex-based tools, fixed structure tools, which will create a lot of false positives and noise. And usually for this type of threat angle, the malware, ransomware, zero-day attack, DLP is very limited in its ability to defend against a zero-day attack. So you have now a new variant of a malware coming in. DLP wouldn't be preventing it up front. It would be trying to then hopefully limit the data from leaving that is exploited by that specific type of attack. So fairly limited capabilities to prevent ransomware or malware. DSPM, Data Security Posture Management, a tool that's been evolving in the past few years, really is intending to map out and help you find and discover where your data is, especially in cloud environments, especially in cloud data stores. A technology which does very well in mapping out the data and in some cases finding misconfigurations and who can have access to the data. But once again, very similar to DLP, it will not actively stop that attack. When the malware lands, when the ransomware lands, when a zero-day attack comes in, DSPM is not really going to prevent that upfront. It will be looking potentially for side effects of what that malware is trying to do, hopefully finding something and then alerting IT to prevent that attack. This is where data detection and response comes in. And this is a new term in the market that is attempting to solve both of these problems, which is how do we prevent the attack from coming in the first place, and how do we actively prevent the data exfiltration when it is happening as well? So instead of only finding the problem, as in mapping out where the data is and asking IT to solve 1,000 problems, we're now looking at a technology that in different ways can prevent the problem from happening in the first place. So specifically, content protection using data detection and response will leverage, for example, content disarm and reconstruction, which is a mechanism for removing malware and ransomware and zero-day attacks, even when they are unknown to the antivirus and sandbox market and endpoint detection market. Even when they don't carry that signature or known behavior, content disarm and reconstruction will successfully remove that threat, preventing the attack in the first place. Let's move on and talk about insider risk management. Because these three technologies play a significant and important role, every one of them provides a different level of protection, especially if you're looking at defense in depth. So data loss prevention, let's tackle this one again. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to prevent an insider from oversharing information with internal employees potentially, or with external users which are not supposed to be exposed to that data. So one of the things we can say about data loss prevention is that it is usually successful in monitoring some of the employee behaviors, right, and actions. For example, usually that would be leveraging endpoint tactics in order to identify some of the activities a user might be doing on the endpoint. So for example, downloading data on a USB drive. In some cases, DLP is deployed successfully on email. Usually what we're seeing is that the pain there is that way too many false positives come up and way too many files and messages are blocked because of the mechanics of using regular expressions. And because of that, what happens is that organizations end up removing the enforcement controls from DLP and really using DLP mainly for detection purposes. While that's okay, it still leaves us with a lot of false positives that the IT and SOC need to deal with. Or if we turn on controls, we end up frustrating the users where many of the messages might be blocked, and then users need to go and reach out to IT in order to release messages that are needed for user productivity. DSPM is very similar in that sense. DSPM does a really good job in finding data and misconfigurations and authorizations and data access for data access governance purposes in the cloud and data stores. One of the challenges is what happens when that data now leaves, especially unstructured data. What happens when unstructured data leaves those environments and stores? That's where DSPM kind of loses visibility, where we can no longer track what is happening with that data. What is that user actually doing later on with that data? And the second piece really ties into that same problem with DLP, which is DSPM doesn't really have a way to automate the remediation of that problem. So if data was then overshared or sent, it is okay to monitor and let IT know. A better approach would obviously be, how do we prevent that in the first place? How do we ensure that with data, when a user attempts to overshare data, how do we stop that when data is in motion? Which, once again, is exactly what data detection and response was designed to do. Data detection and response focuses on obfuscating data through redaction or masking or anonymization, not the entirety of the data, right? We still want the users to be productive. We want them to be able to share data which is needed for business processes. However, having said that, if a social security number is shared, if a driver's license number, if a credit card number is shared where it shouldn't, we would want the message to pass through. However, we would also want the credit card number, for example, to be masked or redacted or anonymized or whatever is the mechanic that is appropriate for that specific transaction. So what's so unique about data detection and response is it monitors in real time data both at rest and in motion, and it takes action, preventative action in real time which actually prevents a lot of noise in the SOC and prevents the oversharing of information in a more proactive way. Moving on to third-party risk, and I think you'll see kind of a similar pattern here. When we think about third-party risk, we're assuming that our third party doesn't have the same level of controls that we have. So what DLP would attempt to do is to enforce policies on where we cannot share information with our third parties. The challenge is that usually with DLP, the decision is binary. Either the transaction is allowed in its entirety or it is not allowed. And if it's not allowed, then obviously you'll see the user reaching out and say, hey, I'm trying to send an email to a legal partner or to a financial partner or any other type of a partner we're collaborating with, and my message is not going through. How do I make this work? So data loss prevention is pretty strict in that sense and doesn't allow the flexibility to achieve that needed productivity. Data security posture management here is slightly less appropriate. It is appropriate for some third-party use cases, but as in most third-party use cases, when you don't have the collaboration of that third party, when you cannot scan their environment, you don't always have visibility in how data was overshared with that third party, as you don't have access for scanning every one of those communication channels, which could be emails, they could be collaboration tools like Teams or Slack, they could be environments like Box or any other file sharing environment, and really having access and controls on that are usually not proactive, preventative, and lack the visibility. Once again, exactly where DDR comes in, data detection and response. Data detection and response, when sharing information with a third party, will take preventative action. It will contain the threat in real time by masking and redacting sensitive data without slowing down productivity. Content is shared in real time, content is available in real time, and yet it is safe and compliant. And the reverse is true as well. This is true when sharing information outbound with my third party. It is also very true when content comes in from third parties. If you remember earlier, we talked about content disarm and reconstruction, a technology that will allow you to prevent ransomware, malware, zero-day attacks from coming into your network and your SaaS applications and your environments, preventing that risk from coming in, which is not always intentional. Some of your partners might have infected machines or servers, which will weaponize files without them even knowing. What are the primary takeaways from this session? I think I'd focus on three main important points. The first one is that securing unstructured data is super important. It is super complex. It is also super important. We've focused in the past a lot on structured data security. How do we secure a database, entries in a database, so they are not misused by users and applications? But an important point is that unstructured data had very limited controls in the cybersecurity market because it is hard, because it is difficult. Votiro and Menlo have spent over a decade in ensuring that we have appropriate controls specifically for files, specifically for unstructured data, because we know that the nature of unstructured data is very unpredictable. Why? Because the entities, the creatures that manipulate, change, and transmit and share unstructured data are humans. Instead of applications, which are a bit more predictable, using structured data, unstructured data is shared by humans, which means our creative nature will allow us to bypass almost any security control. For that, securing unstructured data becomes a very significant investment in 2025 when looking at all of these three types of attacks: threat actors, insider threat, and third-party risk. Data security tools, I talked about DLP and I talked about DSPM. I probably should have also mentioned endpoint detection and response, which is another tool for preventing ransomware and malware on the endpoint, and to some extent providing some DLP controls. All of these tools work very well in tandem, and what data detection and response is attempting to do is actually not displace these technologies. The data detection and response is a defense in depth play which complements these technologies. Yes, it can replace some of these capabilities in some use cases. It can also complement your existing investment to ensure that you're protected against these new world type of attacks, which are powered by AI, with sophisticated phishing attacks and sophisticated zero-day attacks. Most importantly, more than anything, if I would have one single ask from everyone listening to this, in 2025, spend your time thinking about preventative solutions, tools that proactively solve the problem before the problem explodes on your endpoint or on your server, because the more you can do, the more you can shift left, the less you will need to do later cleaning up the mess, and the less time and bandwidth your SOC team will need to spend in detecting the problem and then cleaning up the mess that it created. I will very briefly share with you that the unstructured data problem is a problem we've identified years ago and have been investing years over years in providing coverage for everywhere where files move, everywhere where unstructured data is used, which can include collaboration tools like email, collaboration messaging tools, and such as Teams and Slack, data stores such as Amazon, S3 buckets or Azure Blob or Google Cloud Storage, file sharing tools like Box or OneDrive or SharePoint. You have your SaaS applications where both you and your partners, or maybe sometimes in some cases your customers, are uploading content and unstructured data. And obviously, last but not least, web portals, third-party facing web portals. If you have a partner portal, a customer portal, a consumer portal, anywhere where your consumers and customers are uploading content, resumes, loan applications, credit card applications, healthcare documents, any one of those could be weaponized and used against you to infiltrate into your environment. So ensuring that all of these entry and exit points are secured and making unstructured data safe and compliant is really what we should be thinking of in 2025 to ensure cybersecurity, cyber resilience, and compliance. In Votiro and Menlo Security, we focus on three main things. We prevent ransomware, malware, zero-day attacks, phishing attacks in the browser. We provide browser security for any activity in the browser, both by your employees and by the third parties accessing your applications. We prevent malware and ransomware and zero-day attacks using a technology called content disarm and reconstruction for inbound traffic, making files safe to be used in real time, removing known bad, and especially removing unknown bad, zero-day attacks. And last but not least, protecting your data. Protecting your data in a proactive way, preventing the data from being overshared, overexposed, sent to unauthorized users. We do that by masking the data in real time, detecting the data when it is stored and when it moves, and masking the data in real time based on flexible rules and policies that allow you to be successful in your data security program. This can fall under an insider risk program, a third-party risk program, a data protection program, even specifically extending your DLP program to secure data in motion. We are Votiro. We've been acquired by Menlo Security, which means now we can provide malware, ransomware, phishing prevention across the entirety of everywhere where your users use data and share data. And we'd be happy to take your call and hear more from us about how we do that, and hear from you about your challenges, reach out to us and we'll be happy to help. And I wish you all a fun time with the rest of the sessions today. Have fun and take care.